Okay, in 1781, the American Army had finally reversed the Redcoats' momentum in the South, correct? We've got the British Army marching north into Virginia to regroup after their loss at Guilford Courthouse. Cornwallis decides it's time to regroup, and it was for the first time in many, many years that Washington actually had the British Army on the run. Okay, they were retreating. Well, Washington's thinking, I need a knockout punch. But he's not going to get it unless he gets some help from who? The French. Very good. Now, the French actually joined the American cause in 1777. And how did they join? They were giving us supplies and a few men. So we talked about the French coming in, right? Well, the French fought for a while, and they began to question after watching the progress of the Americans what? After Camden, what might you be thinking if you're the French? Geez, we're spending a lot of money and effort here to maybe in a losing cause. You know what I mean? So the French started, at this point, to consider maybe heading for home and cutting their losses because the cost of helping the Americans was getting pretty expensive, and they didn't see a great bunch of progress. And so Washington not only needs a knockout punch, but he needs the help of the Allies. So he's going to have to put something together to win a big-time victory to turn this thing around. And he's got to convince the French, give me one more opportunity here. Well, so, in historically speaking, only a military grand slam can save the Americans. Okay? Only a military grand slam is going to save the Americans. They got to have one huge victory here, and he's got an opportunity because what are the British doing? Retreating and regrouping. So Washington needs a knockout punch. He knows he can't get it without the French allies, so he's going to have to come up with a strategy and prove to the French that he's got a chance to do something good. So what he needs is a military grand slam. Well, the man that's going to help him load the bases was a Virginia slave by the name of James Armistead. A Virginia slave by the name of James Armistead is going to help Washington load the bases for this military grand slam that he's got to have to knock the British out of the Revolutionary War. A Virginia slave by the name of James Armistead is going to be the guy to help Washington load the bases. Okay, when you talk about slaves, what side did most of the slaves side with? British. Why?
They were giving them rules. They were slaves.
It's close. Okay, why would they side with the? Why would you side with the British if you were going to side with them? Well, think of the opposite. If they think first of all the British are going to win. Second of all, what do the British promise them if they do win? Freedom. Okay, they don't believe in slavery. So most slaves in the colonies have sided with the British with the promise that freedom will result if they remain loyal to Britain and Britain wins this conflict. So Armistead was kind of an interesting guy. He was considered by General Cornwallis as a loyal British servant. Okay? He wasn't anything other than a servant for Cornwallis. Okay, that's how Cornwallis saw him. He was pretty harmless. He was for us. This is Cornwallis thinking. He's for us, and he's willing to serve as my servant. So he earns the trust of Cornwallis and wins the trust of other British officers under Cornwallis. They see Armistead as simply a servant, loyal to Britain.
So he was Cornwallis.
He was just Cornwallis' servant, yep. He was like a servant that didn't get paid, okay? Well, you know what Armistead really is? A patriot spy. And he was one of several slaves that were recruited for the American side. The American side had went out and tried to recruit some slaves. Okay. What does General Washington need to know? What does he need Armistead to give him information on? Troop movements by who? Under Cornwallis. Right, exactly. So General Washington needs to know which direction Cornwallis and his troops are heading in Virginia. Remember, they're marching in Virginia north to regroup? He needs to know exactly where. Well, as the British are marching in Virginia, where's Armistead? Where's he at? He's with them. And he's listening as he's serving Cornwallis and these other officers. He's listening to valuable information, and he's passing it on to Washington through other slaves that are serving as spies. So he just takes off out of camp, going to take a little break, meets up with other slave spies, and gives this information, who then relay it to who? Washington. So Armistead's not going to Washington and giving him the information. He's actually giving it to other slaves that are spies, and they're passing it on to Washington. Well, they actually don't report it first to Washington. They report it to the famous French commander by the name of Marquis de Lafayette. He's 23 years old, and his job right now is to shadow who? Cornwallis. So Marquis de Lafayette is shadowing Cornwallis and his troops, keeping track of them. Yes?
You said he was a French general?
He's a French commander. So these slaves actually are reporting this information from Armistead to Lafayette. And his job is to shadow Cornwallis' army in Virginia. Okay, what is Cornwallis short of? Supplies and ammunition, etc. Well, in August of 1781, Armistead listens and listens, and he uncovers a secret that's going to change the course of the war. So he's just serving General Cornwallis and his officers, and he's listening. And he comes up hearing a secret that may change the course of the war. What Cornwallis and his officers are talking about, and you might have to listen to it before you write it down, is they were trying to find deep water around Virginia. Why? What? Deep water. Deep water. They needed a place so the British could sail their ships in with supplies from where? No. Think about where they're stationed. New York Harbor. So Armistead's listening, and he's hearing these guys talk about a plan to try to find deep water to accommodate the British fleet, who are going to bring army supplies and arms south to Virginia from where? New York Harbor. Okay? Now, where do you think they're going to find this deep water? At Yorktown. Very good, Yorktown. So, what does Armistead do when he hears that information? Relays it to who? The other slave spies who relay it to who? Lafayette. Well, when Lafayette receives this information, he relays the news to who? And where is Washington and his troops right now? Anybody want to guess? Where are they stationed? New York. They're up in New York. Because who's fighting with the colonial armies in the South? Nathaniel Greene. Okay? And Lafayette is stationed down in Virginia to keep an eye on Cornwallis. And Washington wants to know where Cornwallis is going. So when Lafayette receives the information that it looks like they're going to try to meet where? Where are they marching north to? Yorktown, because that's where these ships are going to come with all these supplies. So when Lafayette receives the information from slave spies, he immediately relays the news to Washington. Now this is kind of an interesting coincidence, but at this time, the French have committed to the Americans, and 28 French ships are heading to America to provide assistance from France in this effort. And they're ironically going where to dock? Would they dock in New York Harbor, where the British ships are, where they think they are? Where are they going to dock? Yorktown. So ironically, 28 French ships have been sent by the French government to assist the American Revolution for the colonists. And they're ironically heading for Yorktown because what's in Yorktown? Deep water. Okay? So this is just kind of a coincidence of history. So with this information and knowing that these French ships are heading to Yorktown, Washington's going to prepare a plan to set the perfect trap for Cornwallis and the British. He's going to put together the perfect trap. Now what's the French Navy need to get there before? They need to get there before the British come down from the harbor. So, if Washington attacks at Yorktown, where is Cornwallis' escape? By water. So what is this French Navy going to do? They're going to arrive in Yorktown and block any escape route that Cornwallis would have. Okay? You think those British Navy is going to come into Yorktown in that harbor if it's full of French vessels? No way. They're not going to do it. So Washington's thinking, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to station that French Navy at Yorktown. That'll block Cornwallis' escape. And then I'll march his men from New York into Virginia, join up with who? Maybe. And then trap them by land. And Washington believes that a victory at Yorktown will defeat half of the British forces in the colonies in one swoop. Now, this plan works only if Cornwallis does what? He's already there, but what's he got to do? Okay, what is what? Okay, so he's going to Yorktown because he's expecting British ships to come down with supplies. He's there. So what's he got to do? Well, not know, but what's he got to do to make this work? If Washington's going to come down and trap him at Yorktown and he's not going to be able to escape by water, what does Cornwallis have to do? Stay put. Washington's got to make sure he stays put. Okay? Well, here's the problem. Here's the big problem. So Washington's plan only works if he stays put. What did Washington get word of? Or excuse me, I screwed up. What did Cornwallis get word of? Yes, he all of a sudden finds out that Lafayette and these troops he has are doing what? Shadowing him. So he's decided to march on Lafayette's American troops, which means he would do what? Leave Yorktown. That doesn't work for Washington. And here's Cornwallis. He's got 8,000 soldiers, English soldiers, compared to only 3,200 that Lafayette has. So he's going to go down there and finish off the guy that's shadowing him. That's his plan. So what must Lafayette do? Convince Cornwallis to what? Stay put. Now think about this. Why is Cornwallis going to Lafayette? Because he outnumbers them 8,000 to 3,200. So what's the only way Lafayette talks Cornwallis, or convinces Cornwallis, not talks him, but convinces him to stay put? Makes it look like he has more men. Thus steps in James Armistead again. The slave, the servant. So again steps in James Armistead. This is kind of ironic. Before Cornwallis makes the attack on Lafayette, ironically he sends Armistead to go spy on Lafayette. He trusts him that much. So he sends Armistead to go spy on Lafayette. So Armistead leaves the British camp at Yorktown and he heads towards Lafayette. Well, Armistead goes to Lafayette's men and spies on him. Here to here. Hey, guess what? I'm spying on you. Hey, I'll tell you what you need to do. Go back and tell Cornwallis that we had like 6,000. sit at 32. Just go tell them you've been down here spying. You get 6,000. Okay. So Armistead sneaks all the way back, so to speak, and delivers a message and documents that Lafayette had at least 6,000 soldiers with him. So Armistead goes to spy on Lafayette and the American forces. By order of Cornwallis, goes there and concocts this plan with Lafayette and goes back and provides a document stating that there are 6,000 troops with Lafayette. Okay? And does Cornwallis trust Armistead?
Yeah.
No, almost. He bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. So he chooses to do what? Stand fast. So you think about it. Whoever heard of Jesse Armistead before this day? Jesse Armistead again, or James Armistead again is a guy that turns the course of history. Jesse Armistead was a defensive lineman for the New York Giants. So Armistead delivers for Cornwallis, bringing him a document stating that Lafayette had over 6,000 soldiers with him. Obviously, the document was a fabrication of the truth, but Cornwallis, having no reason not to trust Armistead, bought it and chose to stand fast at Yorktown. Because what's he waiting at Yorktown for? Supplies and weapons from the British fleet from New York Harbor. Well, in September of 1781, General Washington's ground forces arrive outside of Yorktown. In September of 1781, General Washington's ground forces, or army, arrive outside of Yorktown. Who else had arrived by that time? French Navy. And they were docked in the deep water outside Yorktown, blocking any escape route for the British by sea. The British are outnumbered 2-1. 2-1 now. And I'll tell you what, they didn't go easy, because they fought in Yorktown for 3 straight weeks. 3 weeks. So the British are outnumbered 2-1, and they engage the American forces for 3 weeks at Yorktown. And finally, on October 19th, 1781, General Cornwallis surrenders to Washington at Yorktown. After 3 weeks of fighting, finally on October 19th of 1781, Cornwallis surrenders to Washington. Who's the Prime Minister back in Great Britain? Anybody remember? Why is that one?
How come this date isn't?
Well, I'll tell you the rest of the story, and then you can figure that out. It's interesting. Okay?
Is it Townsend still?
Sir Frederick North.
Oh, yeah.
He's still a Prime Minister, and when he gets the news of Cornwallis' surrender, he is in shock. And this is a key. Because Hannah's saying, well, how come we never remember this date? Well, let me ask you a question. Did we win the Revolutionary War in battle? Almost. No. Why did we win the Revolutionary War? Because the British found out at Yorktown that we were not as easy a cupcake as they thought we were going to be. They knew we were going to fight at all costs. And what was it starting to get for them? Very pricey. And so the victory at Yorktown wasn't necessarily a victory that knocked the British, so they couldn't compete or fight anymore. The British knew that to keep fighting this war, they were going to have to send a whole new army over, because they just lost half of them in this battle, and it was going to cost them a lot of money. So really the victory at Yorktown killed the British will to continue the war. Okay? Now, despite this, fighting continued for another year. The British weren't really ready to give up, So for another year, British redcoats, the ones that were left, and some local militia fought until finally the British Army was called back home. We weren't really ready to give up in Britain, but we fought what I call a half-fast war. They didn't bring any new troops over. They weren't going to incur the expense, so they just fought different skirmishes for another year that really, in a way, weren't going to make a huge difference. But they kind of figured like, well, listen, I don't really want to fill my gas tank full of gas to go to Cody this weekend, but hell, I'm not going to waste the gas. At least I'll go to Grable and have some fun with my friends there until I run out of gas, but I'm not putting any more gas in. That's kind of what their thing was. We'll continue to fight these guys and maybe see if there's a turn, but they weren't really committed. It was kind of a half-fast effort. Well, the last battle of the Revolutionary War began on September 11, 1782 at Fort Henry, Virginia. Last battle of the Revolutionary War began on September 11, 1782 at Fort Henry, Virginia. It wasn't much of a battle, but it was the last one, so we're going to tell you about it. There are approximately 100 patriots that were trapped at Fort Henry. About 100 patriots were trapped at Fort Henry on this date, September 11, 1782. And they were surrounded by 50 redcoats and about 250 unfriendly Indians. Okay? So these 100 patriots were trapped at Fort Henry, which is what? A fort. Okay? And that fort was surrounded by 50 redcoats and about 250